ASIC's arrogance is out of control. Martin North, John Adams, Industry People. John, we're back again.
Hello, sir. How are you going today?
Yeah, pretty good. So we managed to shake off the last debate, and now we're moving forward again. And guess what? We're talking about ASIC again.
Yes. Thank you for the opportunity to moderate in terms of last week's debate against Senator Rennick. It was a very interesting in terms of debate discussion, and obviously the audience has voted in a particular way. So, I mean, we will get into the macroeconomic stuff soon, because I know there's very people who are very interested in that whole subject. But can I say, just before we move on to ASIC, and a very important point is that, so with these live debates on DFA, we've had two debates, one versus me versus Robbie Barwick in November, and then last week me versus Senator Rennick. And in both cases, I advocated the same thing, which is, if we are going to resolve the macroeconomic problems we have to shrink the debt, and we have to accept pain, and we have to go through a uncomfortable process. And both Rob and Senator Rennick don't agree with that approach, and yet in both occasions, this audience has accepted my side of the argument. So I mean that potentially may say something about my arguments, or may say something about this particular audience.
Well, it may say something about the audience, but it does. It really brings out to me the sharp contrast, right? Because you can't straddle this. You've either got to say, we got to deal with the debt, or there's another alternative route that allows us to continue to blow the debt out even further, and there'll be no consequences. Now, which of those two is true, of course, is precisely the question. But actually, the more I think about it, with interest rates rising, this debt burden becomes ever more concerning.
Indeed, and Martin, I mean that's a great segue into today's discussion, because in essence, this country is full of problems, all sorts of governmental problems, private sector problems, macroeconomic, micro, all over the place. There's a view in Canberra that they don't want to take on in terms of the hard solution, in terms of actually, I mean, there's a lot of problems we have across Australia, both at a macro level and in terms of a micro level, and there's a lot of people who, in many regards, can't accurately define what the problem is. But once people get a feel for what is the problem, the question is how to resolve it in a way that you get a sustainable benefit and a sustainable outcome that the community, that the broader public is that it is able to enjoy. And so we have seen, like with the debt bubble, that issue continues to fester. It's getting worse and worse and worse as the bubble is going. And in terms of ASIC, multiple reviews, inquiries, royal commissions, its performance is getting worse. And in the last 6 months of these shows we've been doing in terms of this montage, we have heard from numerous people across the country with absolutely horrific horror stories at the hands of ASIC. And that's why, in terms of what we are trying to achieve here, is I'm trying to achieve one is exposure of how deep the problem is, because I don't think the public and the parliament is fully aware of how deep the problem is, but also, basically to convince policymakers the old softly approach that in some regards the old Morrison government was wanting to pursue. It's not going to cut it this time. We actually need a complete, redesign of ASIC, new leadership, new funding model, and we just need better. We don't want a few tweaks here and there. And just so, if I could make a couple of comments, Martin, is that I have spoken to people who have gone to jail at the hands of ASIC, and I had a conversation with someone yesterday who, through one of our viewers, reached out to me. A very tragic story. Someone who had a lot of experience in the financial planning sector, set up a number of financial products. They didn't turn out well. ASIC decided to investigate. Criminal trial happened in 2019. The person was convicted 6 years to go to prison. And this happened in 2019. So I'm speaking to this person yesterday, and my immediate thought goes, well, hang on, if you're in jail, why am I talking to you now? Shouldn't you be actually in jail? And so what happened was this person spent 2.5 years in jail, was able to prepare an appeal. And appeals in criminal trials are very hard to get over the line, but his appeal was unanimously endorsed by a panel of 3 judges, and basically they found that the trial judge gave the wrong set of instructions to the jury and his own barrister, because once you get into financial trouble and then you go through a criminal trial. You don't have any money, so basically you have to rely in some cases on legal aid. And then if you get a barrister with legal aid, sometimes you don't get someone who's competent. And his barrister in this case didn't do a particularly good job. And so he was basically, the appeal court basically found a whole host of process errors, and they said, well, you shouldn't have been found guilty. And so he, after 2.5 years of being in prison, being bashed in prison by various inmates, he was able to come out back into society with no criminal record, obviously, because it's been quashed. But now ASIC is trying to have a retrial, and that retrial is going to happen in another 3-4 months. And this person's now have to go through the entire expense of trying to finance a legal defense against ASIC for a second go around, where ASIC's trying to put this person back in jail. And so, when you hear of that type of experience where someone's lost their business, they've lost their family home, they've lost their marriage, they've gone to jail, they've been bashed, basically, and then an appeal court said that you shouldn't have gone to jail in the first place, and now the government's trying to put that person back in jail. That's a very traumatic conversation to have with a particular individual. So that's one example of someone who's gone to jail. I have spoken to people who are currently under criminal investigation by ASIC, and in one of the cases I've looked at extremely closely, it does look like that ASIC may have developed the wrong case theory, and that they've dropped a nuclear bomb on the wrong village. So there's that story that's going to be presented to the inquiry. And then obviously there are other stories where people have been the victims of fraud or whatever the case may be. They have gone to ASIC and said something really wrong has happened here. And in one case, one of our audience members sent me their draft submission, and one of the big banks basically, the way I read this document was this person was a victim of financial fraud at the hands of one of the big banks. And when this individual went to ASIC and said one of the big banks has engaged in systemic corruption, and I've basically lost my company, my family home, and everything, ASIC said, we don't want to look at it. And so when you see a consistent pattern of failure, and again, I'm not saying that ASIC does no good work, because I'm sure there is some good work that they do, but again, there's just too many of these stories that are coming out of the woodwork that says to me that there's something really wrong. So you would have thought that in this context of the history of ASIC, my reports, and now we're seeing all these new contemporary stories, that ASIC would be somewhat humble and basically say, well, no one's perfect, but if we need to do better, we should do better. But what do we get from ASIC, the chairman, and one of these outgoing commissioners, is absolute contempt for Parliament, absolute arrogance, and only a few days ago was a story in the Financial Review where they accused the Parliament in the Senate of inefficiency in how they conduct oversight and wasting the time of ASIC. And I'm just thinking, who the hell are these people?
Well, John, it's very concerning. I agree with you, firstly, that the number of stories that we've surfaced over the last few months is pretty disturbing, and there are some common characteristics, and quite often it's people who actually tried to engage with ASIC and were unsuccessful, or people who essentially felt that ASIC didn't handle them in a fair and open and transparent way, or indeed people who've spent many weeks, months, years trying to get a case up to explain what was going on. And again, ASIC doesn't want to engage. So it's not just a few, it's a lot. And then when ASIC is under the microscope, they're still trying to defend themselves and basically say, don't distract us from our true work, Parliament. Don't drive us to spend time on this stuff because we need to be over here. It's ridiculous.
Yes, and before we get into this article, Martin, is that we have to give the context of what happened the last few months. So we did a show back in November where we discussed how on the morning of the 27th of October, but probably in the days prior, ASIC officials spoke to Parliament about the inquiry. And the rumour in Parliament is ASIC attempted to marshal the numbers to block an inquiry into its own performance, which to me is highly corrupt. So you have an agency that has enormous legal powers to destroy people's lives, has a history of letting the real crooks in the big end of town off the hook, going after in terms of the small fish. And then when you say, okay, we want to look at your performance, their first instinct is to block an investigation by manipulating the Parliament, completely inappropriate. And now, on the eve of the inquiry, so here we are, it's Australia Day, so we're here on the 26th of January, and where the inquiry is going to start to, in terms of kickoff, in terms of some momentum, as we get into February. And now they're attacking the Parliament publicly, saying you're wasting our time. And why? How on earth do they think that this is appropriate as well as good politics? I have no idea. But this is an agency that is clearly trying to discredit any scrutiny that they're going to get going forward, and they're just trying to say to the Parliament, you don't know what you're doing. You don't know how to do effective oversight. We're the smart people in the room. Leave us alone.
Yeah, absolutely, John. And it's worth saying, I think, that they're not the only official body that somehow feel as though they're above the law and, they know right and everybody else doesn't know right. We should have the public right to ask questions and to ensure that these entities are actually doing what they should be doing and are doing it appropriately. And so it's absolutely appropriate for Parliament to ask questions. And the fact that we've spent a few months trying to get this momentum building, and now we're surfacing a lot of issues, suggests that there's a real set of questions here. And the reason that ASIC is doing what they're doing is because they don't really want to be prodded and they don't want to actually have some of this come out.
Indeed. So I mean, Martin, why don't we just quickly go into the article? So the article was titled "Inefficiency and Gotcha Questions Are Wasting ASIC's Time." So this was published in the Financial Review on the 23rd of January. So why don't we just put slide one on the screen, and I'll just read the opening paragraph. Quote: "Oversight of the corporate watchdog is inefficient, resource intensive, and expensive, and gotcha questions from senators about niche matters are a time waste," outgoing ASIC Commissioner Sean Hughes says. The regulator's top dog, Joe Longo, agrees. Now, Martin, when you get into this article, what Mr. Hughes and Longo are actually trying to talk about is two instances. So we had the budget handed down in October. There was a process in terms of Senate estimates. It wasn't the regular pattern. It was a condensed schedule, so certain officials from all over the country were told to come to Canberra at certain times to take questions. It just so happened that the questions to the Treasury went over in the allotted time, because obviously with the budget there was a lot of questions that senators wanted to ask, and so there was a delay in terms of when ASIC was supposed to come up. So they were supposed to come out, I think, around lunchtime, and then they got delayed a few hours into the afternoon. And so ASIC, the ASIC commissioners were basically sitting in a committee room in Parliament for a couple of hours waiting for their turn to come up. And so this is the first aspect of, why can't the senators keep to time, et cetera, et cetera. And again, I mean, these things happen, and so these people should be mature enough to know that when you're coming to Canberra, you have to, again, because Parliament has an important function to play. So sometimes sometimes things don't go according to plan because there are issues that have come up or questions to be asked that when they set the schedule, people can't anticipate what exactly people want to ask, and so people have to be flexible about that. But then it's a question of the types of questions that they're getting asked, and so the reason why gotcha questions are really important, particularly with public officials, is that particularly with ASIC, if you give ASIC enough advanced time, I'm going to ask you about these sort of topics. Guess what? Guess what's tend to happen? That they have time to prepare their answers, and they have a pre-scripted set of excuses, particularly if it's a controversial matter. And when you do get them on the hop, and you get to ask them a gotcha question, and again, not a stupid one, but a more intelligent one. Well, I mean, sometimes you actually get more honest answers compared to whatever pre-scripted stuff that they want to, in terms of spin out. So I think gotcha questions, particularly where ASIC may have screwed up, are completely within bounds. And so for them to say, don't waste our time and ask us, give us advance notice of the questions you want us to ask. It's like, well, okay, so we're going to, we want to set an exam. We're going to set an exam, and we want you to tell us the questions and so we can prepare our answers before we sit the exam. It's like, well, that's not the way an examination works. And estimates and this oversight is effectively an examination, where bureaucrats are required to sit and take questions and to be examined as to their public conduct and their performance, and they need to be responsive. So I just, before I get onto the other thing, I just want to say that I just thought this whole article, because again, if they have particular criticisms of Senate estimates or inquiries, whatever, nothing stops the chairman of ASIC to either write privately to the committee chair or to pick up the phone and say, we're a little bit upset about what happened. Can you do better next time? But no, they felt that they wanted to publicly attack the parliament through the national media, which is, if you look at the last decade, I don't think this has happened. I mean, quite extraordinary.
Yeah, it is extraordinary, and it goes back to what I said. I suspect that there's a sensitivity within ASIC about some of the issues that we are now, turning over. They really don't want any of this exposed. They want to go on their merry way. And so this is a way of trying to sort of run interference as to what the inquiry might be surfacing.
Yes. Now the other thing I think is very interesting, Martin, is in terms of the timing. So why would you attack the parliament now? I mean, so basically, and we have an important announcement to make. So so obviously, as per our last show, what we said was that submissions for the Senate Economics References Committee's inquiry into ASIC was due on the 3rd of February. Now, I did make some communication with Senator Bragg in the last couple of weeks and suggested that some people may need some additional time. So the committee has agreed that they would extend the deadline until the 28th of February. So people now have an additional 4 weeks to prepare any material. And so what I suspect is going to happen in the next couple of weeks, Martin, is the committee has already received a number of submissions. So I think in the process of February, they will review what they have. And obviously, as February goes on and more submissions come in, they'll keep on processing them. So by the time we get to the 28th, I think the committee will have a firm view as to the types of submissions they have and the types of public hearings that they want to be able to conduct, so they can start to get into in terms of some of these key in terms of some of these key matters. So things are, I mean, there are a couple of really important people who have been away on holidays, particularly some people tied to the Wolf of Woy Woy story that was covered in Four Corners, and I know that. Given some of those dramatic statements that were said on national TV, I think Senator Bragg in particular is heavily keen to ensure that those individuals can tell their story to the Parliament, so that that particular egregious episode is fully considered as part of the inquiry.
Yeah, and it does give people more time. I have to say, John, that a few people I've been speaking with have found it quite difficult to meet the deadline, despite the fact there was quite a long deadline, but now they've got more time. And as we've said on a few occasions, it doesn't have to be a huge document, right? It's really just a critical summary of the main points as to what the issue is, what ASIC did or didn't do. it's not a very long process to put a submission in. And so again, we'd advocate, make a submission. If you've got an issue, if you've had an experience with regard to ASIC and you want the Senate to be aware of it, this is the mechanism. And it's a much better mechanism than actually trying to do a whole bunch of other methods to try and actually raise issues with ASIC. This is a through the front door method.
Yes. And one of the points we made in our last show was that I mean, this is probably the last time this decade that you're going to have this opportunity to be able to tell your story. So if we bring the show to a close, Martin, is that we spent a lot of time and a lot of effort last year doing reports, showing ASIC's failures, getting an inquiry. ASIC attempted to manipulate the parliament, failed. Now, as we get on the eve of the real crunch time of the inquiry, now that even though it's been somewhat extended, rather than actually be humble and actually prepare, if we're talking about, in terms of, a court process, so to speak, ASIC should be preparing their defense as to why has their performance been the way it is. But yet, this is again ASIC attempting to attack the process, attack the institution. I mean, Parliament is their boss. They are the final stop of ensuring that the laws of the Parliament are actually adhered to. And this level of arrogance just shows that, again, a broken organisation with a broken culture. I know that these comments have gone down in terms of it's gone down like a lead balloon inside some of the in terms of the Senate. And so for all those people who have not made a submission, who have an important story to tell about ASIC, you cannot let bureaucrats who are being paid exorbitant sums of money basically treat the public and the parliament with this level of arrogance and complete disrespect. And so if you haven't made your submission, you have a bit of extra time. I implore you to tell the parliament your story so that that we can actually get not just a Canberra softly solution like perhaps Senator Renner would like on some other matters. We need a radical overhaul of ASIC, and we have a few more weeks to ensure that the Parliament has all the information possible to make that happen.
Yeah, and John, it's worth saying, isn't it, that on the 15th or 16th of February, ASIC will be in front of Senate estimates again. I'd pay for a ticket for that. That should be interesting.
Well, yes. So yeah, I'll be encouraging the senators on the 15th and 16th of February, whenever ASIC's before them, to press the chairman about these comments and say, basically, how dare you make these criticisms of the Parliament? I mean, we're your master. You're not our master. You serve us. And so I hope it is. I hope the chairman is brought to account of these comments and he's raked over the coals.
Yeah. Well, thanks, John. I appreciate your time today and bringing this issue again forward. And what we say is, this is an opportunity that people need to grasp. It's probably the last opportunity for this decade. So make sure you get your submission in by the due date.
Yes, and the due date now is the Tuesday, the 28th of February.
Thanks, John. Right. Well, get your pen out, get your typewriter going, get your computer going, get those submissions in. Martin North, John Adams in Interested People. We'll see you next time.